The desert stretched endlessly before her, a canvas of burnt amber and crimson as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. What if being too beautiful could lead to your downfall? This question had haunted Isabella Marino for 23 years, each day etching deeper lines of understanding into her weary soul. She stood at the edge of town, Socorro Springs, a place that had once been her home, now nothing more than a collection of memories stained with bitterness and betrayal. The wind caught her raven black hair, whipping it across a face that had been both her gift and her curse. High cheekbones caught the golden light, full lips trembled with suppressed emotion, and eyes the color of mountain sage reflected a pain too ancient for her young years. Isabella had not chosen this face, this body that moved with unconscious grace, these features that painters had begged to immortalize. She had been born with them, delivered into a world that would punish her for something she could never control. Her mother had died bringing her into this harsh existence, and her father, a simple blacksmith, had looked upon his daughter's extraordinary beauty with fear rather than pride. As she took her first steps into the wilderness beyond Socorro Springs, she carried only a worn canvas bag, a tin canteen half filled with water, and the clothes on her back, a simple cotton dress now dusty from the road. Behind her, the town whispered and sneered, satisfied to see her go, to watch her walk toward what they assumed would be her certain death. The townspeople had made their judgment clear. The women despised her, their eyes sharp with jealousy and accusations. They blamed her for their husbands' wandering gazes, for their sons' foolish declarations, for disruptions in the natural order of their carefully maintained social hierarchy. She became the scapegoat for every marital discord, every broken engagement, every whispered infidelity. The men were no better, perhaps worse. They desired her with a hunger that frightened her, their want transforming into rage when she rejected their advances. She had learned early that her beauty attracted attention she never sought, invitation she never welcomed, and punishments she never deserved. When she refused the mayor's son, a cruel young man accustomed to taking whatever he desired, the tide truly turned against her. He had cornered her behind the general store one sweltering afternoon, his breath reeking of whiskey, his hands reaching for her. She had fought him off, scratching deep furrows across his face, leaving marks that would scar. But in Socorro Springs, her truth meant nothing. His lies meant everything. He claimed she had seduced him, then attacked him when he resisted her advances. The town believed him because believing him was easier than confronting the ugliness in their golden boy. Within days, Isabella found herself shunned completely. The general store refused her business. The church turned her away from its doors. Children threw stones when she passed, their parents watching with approval. Even her father's few friends abandoned him, their loyalty to the blacksmith unable to withstand the pressure of collective condemnation. Her father had tried to protect her, but he was one man against an entire town, and the strain broke something vital inside him. His hands, so steady at the forge, began to shake. His eyes, once warm with love for his only child, grew distant with despair. 3 months after the accusations began, she found him in his workshop, collapsed beside his anvil, his heart finally surrendering to the weight of impossible circumstances. She buried him on a hill overlooking the desert, alone, without ceremony or comfort. No one came to pay respects. No one offered condolences. She was utterly, completely alone, and the town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her to leave, to take her cursed beauty somewhere else, to become someone else's problem. So she left. Not because they wanted her to, but because staying meant dying, slowly by inches, crushed under the weight of their hatred. The wilderness frightened her, its vast emptiness and hidden dangers, but it could not despise her. The desert could not judge her for a face she had not chosen. Whatever death awaited her among the mesquite and sagebrush would at least be honest, unlike the cruelty disguised as righteousness she left behind. As Socorro Springs disappeared behind her, swallowed by the undulating landscape, Isabella felt a strange mixture of terror and relief. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she had no real plan, no destination. Only a vague notion of following the mountains northward until she found another town, another chance, another life that might somehow be different. The first night alone in the wilderness taught her the true meaning of isolation. She made camp, if it could be called that, beneath an outcropping of red rock, gathering dried brush for a small fire. She had matches, but starting a fire properly was harder than she had imagined. The flames kept dying, mocking her city-bred incompetence, until finally, through persistence and growing darkness, she coaxed a fragile blaze into existence. She sat beside her meager fire, listening to the desert come alive with night sounds. Coyotes called in the distance, their howls echoing off canyon walls. Something rustled in the brush nearby, and her heart hammered against her ribs. She had no weapon except a small folding knife that had belonged to her father, its blade no longer than her palm. It offered little comfort against the vast predatory darkness surrounding her. Hunger gnawed at her stomach. She had brought only a small amount of dried meat and hard bread, supplies that would last perhaps 3 days if she was careful. After that, she would need to find food, and she had no idea how. Her father had taught her to read, to calculate figures for his business, to appreciate beauty and craftsmanship, but he had never taught her to hunt, to trap, to survive in the wild. Sleep came in fitful fragments, interrupted by fear and cold, and the strangeness of sleeping on hard ground beneath an infinity of stars. She had never seen so many stars, had never understood how small she truly was until she lay beneath that vast cosmic display, alone and afraid and desperately uncertain about her choice to leave the only home she had ever known. Morning arrived with cruel brightness, the sun transforming the eastern sky into a furnace of orange and gold. Isabella woke stiff and sore, her body unaccustomed to sleeping on bare earth. Her fire had died to cold ashes, and condensation had formed on the inside of her canteen. Precious droplets she carefully licked away before taking a measured sip of her dwindling water supply. She walked north, following game trails when she could find them, pushing through scrub brush when she could not. The land rose and fell in waves of rock and sand, each ridge revealing another identical vista of harsh, beautiful desolation. By midday, the heat had become oppressive, shimmering in waves that distorted the horizon, making her question what was real and what was mirage. Her dress clung to her body, soaked with sweat. Her dark hair, unbound, became a liability in the heat, so she braided it clumsily, wishing she had thought to bring a hat. The soles of her boots, made for town streets rather than wilderness trails, began to separate from the uppers, forcing her to walk more carefully to avoid losing them entirely. On the second day, she made a critical mistake. Desperate with thirst, she drank too deeply from her canteen, draining it to less than a quarter full. Panic seized her as she realized what she had done, but the damage was irreversible. She needed to find water, and soon, or her journey would end in the most terrible way possible. She searched for signs, half-remembered lessons from childhood stories about wilderness survival. Green vegetation meant water, or so she hoped. She followed a dry creek bed, praying it would lead to a spring or seep. Hours passed with agonizing slowness, the sun tracking its merciless arc across the cloudless sky, and still she found nothing. By evening of the second day, her lips had cracked and bled. Her tongue felt thick and foreign in her mouth. Every movement required conscious effort, her body beginning the slow process of shutting down, conserving resources for vital functions, abandoning everything else as unnecessary luxury. She collapsed that night without making a fire, without eating the last of her bread, too exhausted to do anything but lie upon the hard ground and stare at the emerging stars. They seemed to mock her, those cold, distant lights, beautiful and utterly indifferent to her suffering. Perhaps this was fitting, she thought through the fog of dehydration. Perhaps dying alone under an uncaring sky was exactly what a woman cursed with beauty deserved. But something inside her refused to surrender. Some stubborn core of will that had survived her mother's death, her father's heartbreak, the town's cruelty. refused to let her simply lie down and accept death. She slept, and she woke with the dawn, and she stood on trembling legs, and she continued walking north. The third day brought her to the edge of delirium. She saw things that were not there, pools of crystal water that vanished as she approached, figures in the distance that dissolved into rock formations upon closer inspection. She spoke to her father, carrying on long conversations with his ghost, asking for forgiveness, seeking advice, begging for just a little more strength to take one more step. The landscape changed subtly, becoming more rugged, with deeper canyons and higher ridges. She climbed without thinking, driven by instinct more than reason, her body moving while her mind drifted in and out of coherent thought. Near the top of a particularly steep rise, she stumbled, falling hard onto her hands and knees. And there, impossibly miraculously, she found water. It was barely a seep, moisture darkening a patch of stone where underground water pushed through porous rock. She pressed her cracked lips against the stone, licking desperately at the dampness, her body screaming for more than these meager drops could provide. But it was something, a gift from an otherwise merciless land, and she wept with relief as she licked and sucked at the stone until her tongue and lips were numb. She spent an hour at that seep, pressing her handkerchief against the wet stone, then squeezing the moisture into her mouth over and over, a tedious process that yielded perhaps half a cup of water. It was not enough to truly slake her thirst, but it was enough to pull her back from the immediate edge of death. As she rested beside her life-saving seep, she noticed something carved into the rock nearby. Symbols, deliberate marks made by human hands. She traced them with her fingers, unable to decipher their meaning but understanding their message nonetheless. She was not the first to find this place. Others had passed this way, had survived this harsh country, and had left signs for those who would come after. The realization brought fresh tears, but these were different, not tears of despair, but of connection. She was not alone in her suffering. The wilderness was hard, but it was not empty. Life existed here, and where there was life, there was hope. Isabella survived 5 more days in the wilderness, moving from one precarious water source to the next, eating nothing but a handful of bitter berries that made her violently ill and a single lizard. She managed to catch and choke down raw, unable to start a fire with her dwindling supply of damp matches. Her beauty, that cursed gift that had destroyed her life in Socorro Springs, meant nothing here. The desert did not care about high cheekbones or graceful movement. Her face could not negotiate with the sun, could not charm the rocks into yielding water, could not seduce the land into being less harsh. For the first time in her life, her appearance was completely, utterly irrelevant, and there was a strange freedom in that, even as her body weakened and her hope flickered like a candle in the wind. Her dress, once modest and clean, hung in tatters. The hem was torn and filthy, the sleeves ripped by thorns and sharp branches. Her boots had finally given up entirely, the solace separating completely, forcing her to bind them to her feet with strips torn from her petticoat. Every step brought pain, blisters upon blisters, raw flesh grinding against inadequate protection. On the 8th day of her journey, she climbed out of a canyon to find herself facing an impossible barrier. A cliff face rose before her, hundreds of feet of sheer red rock blocking her northward path. She could go around, she supposed, but east or west. She could not tell which direction would be shorter, and she had no strength left for mistakes. She sat down heavily, her back against a boulder, and allowed herself to consider the possibility that she had come as far as she could. The water she had found that morning would be her last. Her body was consuming itself, her clothes hanging loose on a frame that had never been heavy to begin with. She could feel her mind beginning to slip, thoughts becoming fragmented, reality blending with hallucination in ways that no longer frightened her, because she was too tired to be frightened. A raven landed nearby, regarding her with eyes like black beads. It cocked its head, studying her with what seemed like intelligence, perhaps calculation. Was she dead yet? Would she be soon? The bird's pragmatic assessment of her condition struck her as darkly humorous, And she laughed, a cracked, rasping sound that sent the raven hopping backward. "I am not dead yet," she told the bird, though whether she spoke aloud or merely thought the words, she could not say. "Not quite yet." The raven seemed unimpressed. It waited, patient as stone, confident in the outcome of this encounter. Isabella closed her eyes, too weary to maintain even a staring contest with a scavenger bird. The sun beat down, and she felt herself beginning to float, her consciousness loosening its grip on her body, preparing for whatever came next. She thought of her father, hoped that death might reunite them, though she had never been certain about such things. She thought of Socorro Springs, and was surprised to find she felt no bitterness toward the people who had driven her out. They were small and frightened and cruel, but they were also human, flawed and suffering in their own ways. She forgave them, there at what she believed to be the end, because carrying hate into death seemed like an unnecessary burden. She thought of her mother, whom she had never known, and wondered what her life might have been if that strong, brave woman had survived childbirth. Would her beauty still have been a curse? Or would her mother have taught her how to navigate the treacherous waters of being different, being noticed, being wanted for the wrong reasons? Time passed, marked only by the slow movement of shadows across stone. The raven remained, occasionally cawing, a harsh sound that echoed off the cliff face. Isabella drifted in and out of awareness, her body conserving its last reserves of energy, her mind retreating to memories and dreams indistinguishable from one another. And then, cutting through the haze of her dying thoughts, she heard something new: hoofbeats, the steady rhythm of horses moving across hard ground. At first, she dismissed it as another hallucination, but the sound grew louder, more distinct, accompanied now by the creak of leather and the jingle of tack. She tried to open her eyes, but her lids felt impossibly heavy. She tried to call out, but her throat produced only a faint whisper. She tried to move, to make herself visible to whoever was approaching, but her body refused to obey. She could only lie there, helpless, as the hoofbeats came closer, then stopped somewhere nearby. Voices, low and concerned, footsteps approaching. A shadow falling across her face, blocking the merciless sun. Strong hands touching her throat, checking for a pulse. A canteen at her lips, blessed water trickling into her mouth, and a voice deep and gentle, telling her to drink slowly, not too fast, just a little at a time. She forced her eyes open and found herself looking up at a face that seemed carved from the same stone as the surrounding cliffs. A man, perhaps 40 years old, weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of winter sky and a thick beard shot through with silver. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that cast his features in shadow, but she could see concern in those pale eyes, and something else, something like recognition, though they had never met. Behind him stood another man, younger, holding the reins of 3 horses. And beyond them, silhouetted against the bright sky, she could see more riders, a small group of men who had stopped their journey to investigate what probably looked like a pile of rags against a boulder but had turned out to be a dying woman. "You are safe now," the man with winter sky eyes told her, his voice rough but kind. "Rest now, we will take care of you." And Isabella, who had survived rejection and cruelty and 8 days in the wilderness, who had endured more than most people face in a lifetime, finally allowed herself to let go. She surrendered to the darkness that had been waiting patiently, confident now that she would wake again, that this was not death but rescue, that somehow, impossibly, her story was not over. Isabella woke to softness, a sensation so unfamiliar that for a moment, she thought she had died and found herself in some unexpected afterlife. But dead people did not ache in every muscle, did not feel the sting of healing blisters, did not smell the peculiar combination of leather, wood smoke, and horse that filled her nostrils. She opened her eyes to find herself in a small room with log walls, lying in an actual bed with clean sheets and a thick quilt. Sunlight streamed through a single window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. A pitcher of water stood on a small table beside the bed, and next to it, a bowl of what looked like broth, still steaming. She tried to sit up, and immediately regretted it as her head spun and her vision darkened at the edges. A hand pressed gently against her shoulder, easing her back down, and a woman's voice, warm and musical, told her to be still. The woman who bent over her was perhaps 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a face lined with smile creases and sun exposure. She wore a simple dress of faded calico and smelled faintly of sage and bread. Her eyes, dark brown and kind, assessed Isabella with the practiced gaze of someone accustomed to nursing the sick and injured. "My name is Rosa," the woman said, adjusting the pillows behind Isabella's head. "You are at the Broken Creek Ranch. You have been asleep for 2 days, which is not surprising given the condition you were in when the men brought you here. You were very nearly dead, child." Isabella's voice emerged as a croak. Where I am?" "About 40 miles north of Socorro Springs," Rosa replied, and Isabella's heart sank at the mention of her former home. Rosa seemed to read her expression and patted her hand reassuringly. "Do not worry. You are safe here. No one will send you away. Now you must drink, and then you must eat, even if only a little. Your body needs nourishment, if it is to heal." Over the next hour, Rosa patiently coaxed small sips of water and spoonfuls of rich broth into Isabella, allowing her stomach to adjust slowly to the presence of food after its long deprivation. Between bites, she explained that the Broken Creek Ranch was owned by a man named James Thornton, the same man who had found her dying against that boulder 8 days ago. "He's a good man," Rosa said, her tone carrying weight beyond the simple words. "He does not judge people by their appearance or by rumors. He judges them by their actions, by their character. You will be safe here for as long as you need." Isabella wanted to ask more questions, but exhaustion pulled at her again, and Rosa encouraged her to sleep, promising that all her questions would be answered in time. Isabella drifted off, more comfortable than she had been in months, perhaps years, her last conscious thought wondering what kind of man ran a ranch that would take in a dying stranger without question. She woke again as evening painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. This time she felt stronger, clear-headed enough to truly observe her surroundings. The room was simple but clean, furnished with obvious care. The bed frame was handmade but sturdy, the quilts colorful and expertly stitched. Someone had placed wildflowers in a small vase on the windowsill, a touch of beauty that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. The door opened softly, and the man from the desert, James Thornton, entered carrying a tray. He seemed to fill the small room with his presence, not because he was particularly large, though he was tall and broad-shouldered, but because he carried himself with a quiet confidence that commanded attention without demanding it. "Miss Marino," he said, his voice that same rough, gentle tone she remembered from her rescue. "Rosa tells me you are feeling better. I have brought you something more substantial to eat, if you think you can manage it. How do you know my name?" Isabella asked, accepting the tray with trembling hands. "Your father's initials were inside your father's knife," he replied, settling into a chair near the window. "Jay and I took the liberty of sending word to Socorro Springs, asking after anyone who might be searching for a young woman. The responses I received were enlightening." Isabella felt heat rise to her cheeks, shame and anger mixing in equal measure. "Then you know what they said about me. The accusations." James Thornton regarded her with those winter sky eyes, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "I know what they said. I also know the character of the man who made those accusations, as his father and I have had dealings in the past. I know that truth and popular opinion are not always the same thing. And I know that a woman does not walk into the desert to die unless the alternative has become unbearable." He stood, moving to look out the window at the darkening landscape. "I built this ranch 20 years ago with my wife," he said quietly. "Sarah was the finest person I have ever known. Beautiful, yes, but more than that. Kind, strong, principled. We had 10 good years together before the fever took her. People used to whisper about her too, you know. Said she was too beautiful for a simple rancher, that she must have trapped me somehow, that she was probably unfaithful. The cruelty of small minds knows no bounds, Miss Marino. He turned back to face her, and in the dimming light, she could see old pain in his eyes, carefully controlled but never fully healed. After Sarah died, I made myself a promise. This ranch would be a place where people could find refuge, where they would be judged by their actions rather than their appearance or their past. I cannot change the cruelty of the world, but I can offer an alternative to it, at least within these boundaries. Isabella found her voice. Why are you telling me this? Because tomorrow you will meet the rest of the people who live and work here, and you will see that this ranch is populated by misfits and outcasts, by people whom the world has rejected for one reason or another. Some made mistakes. Some were born different. Some, like you, were punished for things beyond their control. But here, we judge each other by different standards. Here, you will be safe to be whoever you truly are, not what others project onto you. He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her. You are welcome to stay as long as you wish, Miss Marino. If you choose to move on when you are stronger, we will provide you with supplies and directions to wherever you wish to go. But if you choose to stay, there will be work for you, and a place at our table, and protection from anyone who might wish you harm. The choice is yours, and no one will think less of you whatever you decide. And then he was gone, leaving Isabella alone with her thoughts and a rapidly cooling dinner she could barely taste through the tears streaming down her face. The morning sun painted everything gold when Isabella finally felt strong enough to leave her room. Rosa had brought her clean clothes, a simple work dress and sturdy boots that fit reasonably well, borrowed from Sarah Thornton's carefully preserved wardrobe. Isabella ran her fingers over the fabric, feeling the quality of the stitching, the care with which these garments had been maintained over the years. She found Rosa in the kitchen, a large, warm space filled with the smell of fresh bread and coffee. Through the windows, she could see the ranch spread out before her, a collection of sturdy buildings arranged around a central yard, with corrals holding horses and cattle visible in the distance. Mountains rose in every direction, creating a natural fortress that made her feel simultaneously protected and small. Rosa introduced her to the ranch's other inhabitants over breakfast. There was Miguel, a Mexican vaquero in his 50s who had lost his left arm in a stampede and been cast aside by his previous employer as useless. He now managed the ranch's horses with more skill than most men possessed with 2 arms, using a specially modified saddle and sheer expertise accumulated over decades. There was Tom, a young black man who had escaped slavery as a boy and made his way west, finding work where he could, always moving, always wary, until James Thornton had offered him not just employment, but belonging. He worked as the ranch's carpenter and blacksmith, his hands capable of creating both delicate beauty and practical function. There was Sarah, not the late Mrs. Thornton, but a Paiute woman of about 30 who had been driven from her tribe for reasons she did not share, who now managed the ranch's garden and herb collection, her knowledge of plants making her invaluable for both food and medicine. There was Daniel, a former soldier whose mind had been broken by war, who spoke rarely but worked tirelessly, finding in the routine of ranch life a structure that kept the worst of his demons at bay. And there were others, a dozen souls in total, each carrying their own story of rejection and redemption, each finding in Broken Creek Ranch a place where their past did not define their present. James Thornton presided over this unlikely family with quiet authority. He worked alongside his people, mucking stalls and mending fences, and riding the rough country to check on cattle. He was generous but not soft, demanding honest effort but understanding of human limitation. He settled disputes with fairness, celebrated successes with genuine joy, and mourned failures with compassion rather than blame. Isabella watched all of this from a distance during her first days of recovery. She helped Rosa in the kitchen, a safe place to observe and learn without being thrust into situations she was not ready to handle. She learned that Rosa had been James Thornton's wife's nurse during her final illness and had simply stayed after Sarah's death, becoming the heart of the household, the mother figure to a family of broken people trying to piece themselves back together. As her strength returned, Isabella began to venture further from the main house. She sat on the porch in the evenings, listening to Miguel play guitar and sing old songs in Spanish, his voice rough but true. She walked to the corrals with Tom, learning about the horses, discovering that she had a natural affinity with the animals, that they responded to her gentle approach and patient manner. She helped Sarah in the garden, learning the names and properties of desert plants, understanding for the first time that the wilderness that had nearly killed her was also full of food and medicine for those who knew where to look. The Paiute woman taught her in silence at first, letting actions speak louder than words. And gradually, over shared labor, they began to talk, to share their stories, to recognize in each other the scars left by being different in communities that demanded conformity. 1 month after her arrival, James Thornton approached her as she stood watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of crimson and purple. He had been absent for several days, making his monthly trip to the nearest town for supplies and business. "Walk with me," he said, and she fell into step beside him, heading toward a small rise overlooking the ranch. They walked in companionable silence until they reached the top, where a simple wooden cross marked a grave. Sarah Thornton, the marker read, "Beloved wife and friend, 1825 to 1863. The grave was well tended, with wildflowers growing around its base, carefully watered and maintained." "I come here when I need to think," James said, settling onto a large rock near the grave. Sarah was wise in ways I will never be. She had a gift for seeing people truly, for looking past the surface to the soul beneath. She would have liked you, Miss Marino. You have her same quiet strength, her same refusal to let cruelty make you cruel in return. Isabella did not know what to say, so she remained silent, waiting. "I heard more stories about you in town," James continued. "About how you cared for your father when he was dying, how you faced down the mayor's son rather than submit to his demands. About how you refused to leave Socorro Springs, even when it would have been easier, because you would not let them drive you away while your father still lived. That takes courage, Miss Marino. Real courage, not the loud, boastful kind, but the quiet, enduring kind that weathers storms and refuses to break." He turned to look at her directly. "I have a proposition for you. This ranch runs smoothly, but we are always one injury, one illness, one piece of bad luck away from things falling apart. I need someone who can oversee the household, who can manage supplies and coordinate the work, who can serve as my partner in running this place. Rosa is wonderful, but she is not getting younger, and she deserves to spend her remaining years in comfort rather than constant labor." Isabella's heart began to pound. "What are you asking?" "I am asking if you would consider staying permanently as my ranch manager. You would have authority second only to my own, a fair wage, and a share of the profits. More than that, you would have a purpose, a place where your abilities matter more than your appearance. I have watched you these past weeks, Miss Marino. You are intelligent, organized, compassionate, and strong. You are exactly what this ranch needs." But Isabella hesitated. What will people say? About a young woman living on a ranch with an unmarried man? James smiled slightly. "They will say exactly what they always say, that I am a fool, that you are a temptress, that scandal lurks around every corner. And I will ignore them, as I always do, because their opinions mean nothing to me. What matters is the work, the land, the people who depend on this place. If you are worried about propriety, Rosa will continue to live in the main house as chaperone. But honestly, Miss Marino, if you care what small-minded people think, you will never be free." He stood, preparing to leave her with her thoughts. "You do not need to answer now. Think about it. Pray about it, if you are so inclined. But know that the offer is genuine, and it comes without expectation of anything beyond honest work and fair dealing." As he walked away, Isabella remained by Sarah Thornton's grave, watching the last light fade from the sky. For the first time since her father's death, she felt the stirring of something she had almost forgotten: hope. Isabella accepted James Thornton's offer, and with that decision, she began the work of transforming herself from victim to survivor, from refuge seeker to refuge provider. The change did not come easily or quickly, but it came day by day, challenge by challenge, until she could barely recognize the frightened, broken woman who had stumbled into the desert months before. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, the endless cycle of seasons and tasks that governed their existence. Spring brought calving and branding, long days spent helping difficult births and marking new stock. Summer brought haying and range riding, checking water sources and mending miles of fence line. Fall brought roundup and market preparation, sorting cattle and breaking horses. Winter brought maintenance and planning, fixing equipment and preparing for the next year's cycle. She discovered capabilities she had never known she possessed. Her father had taught her numbers, and she used that knowledge to maintain the ranch's accounts with meticulous accuracy. She negotiated with suppliers, getting better prices through careful shopping and loyal relationships. She organized the household with efficiency, ensuring that everyone had what they needed when they needed it, that meals appeared on time, that clothing was mended and medical supplies were stocked. But more than practical skills, she learned the art of leadership. She learned when to push people beyond their comfort zones and when to offer grace for human limitations. She learned to see potential in rough materials, whether horses that others had given up on, or people who had given up on themselves. She learned that true strength was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. The ranch prospered under her management. Cattle sales improved because she insisted on better care and feeding. Horse breeding became a lucrative sideline because she recognized quality bloodlines and matched them intelligently. The household ran with clockwork precision, freeing James to focus on larger strategic decisions about land acquisition and business partnerships. But prosperity brought attention, and attention brought trouble. It started with visits from neighboring ranchers, men who claimed they wanted to discuss business, but whose eyes lingered too long on Isabella's face, whose compliments carried undertones that made her skin crawl. James rebuffed them politely but firmly, making it clear that Miss Marino was his business partner and was not available for courting or conquest. Then came the whispers, familiar poison in new bottles. Rumors spread through the territory that James Thornton had taken a mistress, that the Broken Creek Ranch was really a house of sin disguised as legitimate business, that no decent woman would live in such circumstances. The fact that Rosa continued to reside in the main house, that Isabella maintained her own bedroom and her own separate entrance, that their relationship was conducted with scrupulous propriety, meant nothing to those determined to see scandal. The crisis came in the form of a man named Richard Holloway, a wealthy cattleman who owned the largest spread in the territory. He was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, whether through fair dealing or foul, and he had decided that he wanted both Isabella and James Thornton's prime grazing land. He arrived at Broken Creek on a scorching July afternoon, accompanied by 6 hard-looking men wearing guns with the casual ease of frequent use. James met them in the yard, and Isabella watched from the porch, her hand resting on the rifle she had learned to shoot with surprising accuracy. "Thornton," Holloway called out, not bothering to dismount. "I have come with an offer. I will pay you double the market value for your land, and I will marry Miss Marino, giving her the respectability she clearly lacks in her current situation. This is generous, more than generous, and I expect you to accept." James Thornton stood perfectly still, his face expressionless. "And if I refuse?" Holloway smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then I will make your life very difficult, Mr. Thornton. I have friends in the territorial government, connections you lack. I can make problems appear, taxes come due, water rights questioned, titles challenged. Or," he gestured to his armed companions, "accidents happen on the range. Cattle disappear. Buildings catch fire. Good men get hurt for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The threat hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Isabella felt rage building inside her, a fury she had learned to control but never quite extinguished. She stepped off the porch, moving to stand beside James, ignoring his slight headshake warning her to stay back. "Mr. Holloway," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I am not a piece of property to be traded between men. I have no interest in marrying you, regardless of whatever respectability you imagine you can provide. And this ranch is not for sale at any price." Holloway's smile widened, becoming predatory. "Miss Marino, you misunderstand your position. You are a woman of questionable reputation, living in improper circumstances. A word from me in the right places, and you will find yourself facing legal troubles of your own. Vagrancy charges, perhaps. Prostitution accusations. I can make your life every bit as difficult as Mr. Thornton's." "Then you will have to do so," Isabella replied. "Because we are not interested in your offer, generous or otherwise. Please leave our property." For a moment, Holloway's mask slipped, revealing the cold fury beneath his practiced charm. "You are making a mistake," he said. "Both of you. I came here offering a civilized solution. Next time, I will not be so courteous." He wheeled his horse around, his men following suit, and they rode off in a cloud of dust and implied violence. Isabella felt her knees begin to shake with delayed reaction, but she remained standing until they disappeared from view. James touched her shoulder gently. "That was bravely done," he said. "Also possibly foolish. Holloway is not a man who accepts rejection gracefully." "I know," Isabella replied. "But I am done being afraid of powerful men who think they can take whatever they want. I would rather fight and lose than surrender without struggle." James smiled, a rare, full expression that transformed his weathered face. Sarah would have said exactly the same thing. "Come, we have preparations to make. If Holloway is true to his word, we will have trouble soon." He was right. Trouble came like a prairie fire, slow at first, then all at once, consuming everything in its path. Within a week of Holloway's visit, James received notice that his water rights were being challenged, that his land title was under review due to alleged irregularities in the original filing. Cattle began disappearing from the far ranges, not in numbers large enough to prove deliberate theft, but enough to hurt, enough to send a message. The territorial marshal, a man in Holloway's pocket, made frequent visits to the ranch, asking intrusive questions, inspecting papers, searching for any violation that could be used as leverage. He paid particular attention to Isabella's presence, asking pointed questions about her relationship with James, implying impropriety, suggesting that a respectable woman would not place herself in such a compromising position. Isabella endured these visits with gritted teeth and forced courtesy, but each one wore away at her hard-won peace. The old fears returned, whispers in her mind telling her that she was the problem, that her presence brought danger to good people, that everyone would be better off if she simply left. James seemed to read her thoughts. "Do not even consider it," he told her one evening after a particularly ugly confrontation with the marshal. "You are not the cause of this trouble, Holloway is. And if you left, he would simply find another excuse to come after this ranch. This is about land and pride and a powerful man's inability to accept rejection. Your presence here is not the problem. It is merely the excuse." But Isabella could see the strain on everyone. Miguel's smile became less frequent. Tom worked longer hours, as if staying busy could ward off the inevitable. Sarah the Paiute woman began carrying a knife openly, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon for threats. Even Rosa, usually unflappable, grew tense and worried. The crisis reached its peak on a moonless night in August. Isabella woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of shouting. She rushed from her room to find the barn engulfed in flames, the horses screaming in terror, and shadowy figures on horseback retreating into the darkness. James and the ranch hands fought the fire with desperate intensity, forming bucket lines from the well, soaking blankets to beat at the flames. Isabella ran to the corrals, helping Miguel release the panicked horses before the fire could spread to them. Tom worked to save equipment intact, dragging saddles and tools from the burning structure. They saved most of the horses and some of the equipment, but the barn was lost, collapsing in a shower of sparks and embers that lit the night like hellfire. As dawn broke, they stood exhausted and ash-covered, staring at the smoking ruin of a building that had taken months to construct. No one had been killed, which was a miracle. But everyone understood that this was a warning, an escalation. The next attack would be worse. James called a meeting that afternoon, gathering everyone in the main house. His face was drawn with exhaustion and anger, but his voice remained steady as he addressed his people. "I will not lie to you," he said. "We are under attack by a man with more resources and fewer scruples than we possess. He wants this land, and he wants to destroy us for refusing to give it to him. I cannot guarantee your safety if you choose to stay. No one will think less of you if you decide to leave, to find safer employment elsewhere. But if you choose to stay and fight, I promise you that I will not surrender without exhausting every legal and moral option available to us." Miguel spoke first, his accent thick with emotion. "I stay. This is my home. I have nowhere else to go, and even if I did, I would not run from bullies." One by one, the others affirmed their commitment. Tom, Sarah, Daniel, Rosa, all of them choosing to stand rather than flee. Isabella felt tears streaming down her face, moved by their loyalty, their courage, their refusal to let cruelty win. But she also understood something that perhaps James did not yet see. Holloway's true target was not the land or even James himself, it was her. The land was desirable, yes, but Holloway's fury came from rejection, from a beautiful woman daring to refuse him. As long as she remained at Broken Creek, Holloway would continue his campaign of destruction, unwilling to let such an insult stand. That night, as the household slept fitfully, recovering from the trauma of the fire, Isabella packed a small bag with supplies. She wrote a letter to James, explaining her decision, thanking him for his kindness, absolving him of any blame. She would leave before dawn, would disappear into the wilderness she had learned to navigate, would take the fight away from people who had become family. She made it as far as the gate before James's voice stopped her. "Where do you think you are going?" She turned to find him standing in the moonlight, fully dressed, as if he had been expecting this. "Away," she said simply. "Before anyone else gets hurt because of me." James walked toward her, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "Do you know what Sarah told me shortly before she died? She said that the measure of a person's character is not what they endure, but what they refuse to accept. She refused to accept that her illness meant the end of her usefulness. She worked from her sickbed, planning the ranch's future, organizing our lives even as her own was ending. She refused to let death rob her of purpose." He reached out and took the bag from her hands. "You are doing the same thing now, letting fear rob you of the life you have built here. Holloway wins if you leave, Isabella. Not because he gets the land, but because he proves that beautiful women can be intimidated, that they will always eventually surrender to the will of powerful men. Is that the lesson you want to teach? Is that the truth you want to live?" Isabella felt something break inside her, some final wall of self-protection crumbling away. "I am so tired of bringing trouble to good people," she whispered. "Everyone I love pays the price for my face, for something I cannot change and did not choose." James pulled her into an embrace, paternal and comforting. "Then stop running," he said gently. "Stop accepting responsibility for other people's cruelty. You did not set that fire. Holloway did. You did not challenge our water rights. Holloway did. You are not the problem, and leaving will not solve anything. Stay and fight, and show the world that women like you, like Sarah, cannot be broken by fear." Isabella clung to him, this man who had become the father her own father could not be, this protector who asked nothing in return except honest effort and genuine courage. And in that moment, she made her final choice, not to run, not to hide, not to let her cursed beauty define the limits of her life. Together, they walked back to the house, back to family, back to fight. The legal battle took 6 months, a grinding, expensive affair that drained the ranch's resources and tested everyone's resolve. James hired lawyers from Denver, men who understood territorial politics and were not intimidated by Holloway's connections. They filed countersuits, challenged every spurious claim, demanded investigations into the suspicious cattle disappearances and the convenient fire. Isabella threw herself into the fight with fierce determination. She organized documentation, tracked expenses, provided testimony with clear-eyed precision that impressed even the most skeptical judges. She proved to be a formidable witness, articulate and unshakable under cross-examination. Her beauty now an asset rather than a liability because it attracted attention to her words rather than distracting from them. The territorial marshal, under scrutiny from higher authorities, began to distance himself from Holloway. Other ranchers, watching the drama unfold, started to question whether allying with Holloway was wise if it meant condoning arson and intimidation. The tide of public opinion, that same force that had destroyed Isabella in Socorro Springs, began to turn against her enemy. The turning point came when Sarah, the Paiute woman, revealed that she had witnessed the barn fire and could identify 2 of Holloway's men as the arsonists. She had been checking snares in the hills that night and had seen them approach the ranch, had watched them set the fire and flee. Her testimony, delivered in halting but unshakable English, provided the criminal evidence that had been lacking. Faced with potential criminal prosecution and the collapse of his social standing, Holloway sued for peace. He dropped all legal challenges against Broken Creek, paid substantial damages for the barn and lost cattle, and publicly apologized for the actions of his men, whom he claimed had acted without his knowledge or consent. No one believed the latter, but it allowed both sides to step back from the brink. Holloway retreated to his own lands, his reputation damaged but his freedom intact. The territorial government, embarrassed by the whole affair, made a show of investigating corruption among its marshals and strengthening protections for smaller landowners. Broken Creek survived, not unscathed but intact, stronger in some ways for having endured the trial. A new barn rose from the ashes of the old, built by the hands of people who had chosen to stay and fight. The ranch prospered, its reputation enhanced rather than diminished by the publicity of the conflict. Isabella transformed fully in the crucible of that fight. The frightened girl who had fled Socorro Springs had become a woman of substance and authority, someone whose opinion mattered, whose decisions shaped outcomes, whose presence commanded respect. Her beauty remained, unchangeable and striking, but it had become merely one aspect of a complex person rather than the totality of her identity. She stood one evening on the same hill overlooking the ranch, watching the sun set over mountains that no longer seemed threatening but protective. James joined her, as he often did in quiet moments, the 2 of them sharing companionable silence. "Rosa wants to know if you will stay," he said finally. "She is planning the spring planting and needs to know how much to grow." Isabella smiled. "Where else would I go?" "Anywhere you wanted," James replied. "You have money now, resources, connections. You could go back east, could start fresh somewhere that does not know your history. You have options, Isabella. You are not trapped here." She considered this, turning the idea over in her mind like a smooth stone. "You are right," she said. "I do have options. But this is where I choose to be. Not because I am hiding or running or settling for safety, but because this is home. These people are family, this work matters. For the first time in my life, I am exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I want to do." James nodded, satisfaction evident in his weathered features. "Sarah would be proud of you. Hell, I am proud of you. You took something meant to destroy you and turned it into strength. That is the definition of courage, Isabella." As they walked back to the house, back to dinner and conversation and the warm comfort of belonging, Isabella reflected on her journey. From Socorro Springs to the edge of death in the wilderness, from frightened refugee to confident leader, she had traveled farther than miles could measure. Her beauty had been a curse, yes, but only because of how others chose to react to it. The true curse had been her acceptance of their judgment, her internalization of their cruelty, her belief that she deserved punishment for something beyond her control. Breaking free of that mindset had been harder than surviving the desert, more dangerous than facing Holloway's attacks, more challenging than any physical trial. She had learned that redemption was not something granted by others, but something you claimed for yourself through action and choice and refusal to surrender to despair. She had learned that family was not defined by blood, but by loyalty and shared struggle and genuine care. She had learned that home was not a place but a feeling. That sense of belonging she had found among the misfits and outcasts of Broken Creek Ranch. Years later, when travelers passed through the territory and asked about the beautiful woman who helped run the most successful ranch in the region, they heard a different kind of story than the ones that had been told in Socorro Springs. They heard about Isabella Marino's business acumen, her fairness as an employer, her courage in standing up to powerful interests. They heard about the sanctuary she maintained for people society had rejected, about her advocacy for fair treatment of workers, about her quiet generosity to those in need. Some still whispered about her beauty, still speculated about her relationship with James Thornton, still tried to reduce her to nothing more than an attractive face. But those whispers had lost their power because Isabella had stopped listening to them. She had learned the most important lesson of all, that other people's opinions could only hurt her if she gave them permission. She stood one final time on the hill where Sarah Thornton lay buried, older now, weathered by sun and experience, no less beautiful but no longer defined by beauty. She placed wildflowers on Sarah's grave, as she did every week, a ritual of respect and remembrance. "Thank you," she whispered to the woman she had never met but whose wisdom had saved her life. "Thank you for teaching James that people are more than their appearance, that redemption is possible, that cruelty does not have to win. I hope I have honored your legacy by becoming someone worthy of the grace you showed in creating this place." The wind carried her words away across the vast landscape, that harsh and beautiful country that had almost killed her and ultimately saved her. She turned back toward the ranch, toward home, toward the life she had built from the ashes of destruction, toward the family she had found among the broken and rejected. Her beauty remained, but it was no longer her curse. It was simply one part of her, like her intelligence, her courage, her compassion, her strength. She had learned to live as a whole person, rather than a collection of others' projections and fears. And in that learning, Isabella Marino found the truest redemption of all, not rescue from external circumstances, but freedom from internal chains, not acceptance by society, but acceptance of herself, not a fate changed by a mysterious rancher, but a fate she chose for herself, day by day, choice by choice, step by step, walking confidently into a future she had earned through suffering and survived through courage. The sunset painted everything gold as she walked home, and for the first time in her life, Isabella felt beautiful inside and out, not because of her face but because of her heart, not despite her struggles but because of them, not in spite of the world, but in harmony with the small corner of it she had claimed as her own. In the harshest landscapes, we discover our truest selves. In the crucible of suffering, we forge strength we never knew we possessed. And in the acceptance of broken, imperfect people choosing to stand together, we find the only redemption that truly matters, the kind that comes from within and radiates outward, transforming not just ourselves but the world around us. One act of courage, one moment of kindness, one choice to stand rather than run, at a time.
Thanks for watching this story till the end. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And before you go, check out these other amazing Western stories waiting for you next. Subscribe, like, and I'll see you on the next ride.